Foreign policy and international trade. Since 1998, Chinese foreign policy has undergone profound changes that have brought the country closer into the mainstream of international politics. China still resists pressure from other countries to improve its human rights record, and Chinese leaders continue to threaten to invade Taiwan now and again. However, especially in the areas of trade, China has integrated into the world community in almost unprecedented ways. It is quickly replacing China as the most powerful economy in Asia, and is now Asia's central economy that affects all others. Chinese-Japanese relations have been problematic since the late 19th century when Japan began to rise as a world power, generally at China's expense. Both countries are particularly sensitive about Japan's invasion of China during World War II, and formal relations were called off for several months in 2006 because the Japanese Prime Minister visited a controversial war memorial. Now the two countries are on speaking terms again, but tensions still remain. China also has trading partners all over the world, and that trade is an integral part of the growing economy. Foreign policy under Mao. Until Mao's death in 1976, the PRC based its foreign policy on providing support for Third World revolutionary movements. It provided substantial developmental assistance to a handful of the most radical states. Examples are Korea and Vietnam. Under Mao, China's relationship with the USSR changed dramatically in the late 1950s from one of dependence to independence. During the 1920s and 1950s, the USSR gave large amounts of money as well as technical and political advice to China. The countries broke into rivalry during the late 1950s when Mao decided that the Soviets had turned their backs on Marx and revolution. The Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution affirmed China's independent path from Moscow's control. U.S.-Chinese relations. The chill in China-Soviet relationships encouraged the U.S. to eye the advantages of opening positive interactions with China. As long as Mao was in control, his anti-capitalist attitudes, as well as U.S. containment policy, meant that countries had no contact until the early 1970s. Then, with Mao sick and weak, reformist Zhou Enlai opened the door to Western contact. President Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger engineered negotiations, and Nixon's famous 1972 visit to China signaled a new era. Relations opened with a ping-pong match between the two countries, but after Deng Xiaoping's leadership began in 1978, his open-door policy helped lead the way to more substantial contact. Today, the U.S. imports many more products from China than it exports, and is concerned about the imbalance between exports and imports. The U.S. has pressured China to devalue their currency and to crack down on illegal exports. But so far, China has not cracked down on illegal exports. However, it did devalue the renminbi in August of 2015, making its exports cheaper and imports more expensive. Another issue between China and the Western nations has been internet hacking, with Western governments and companies long suspecting that Chinese hackers besieging their networks have links to the country's armed forces. In early 2013, an American security company, Mandiant, offered evidence to substantiate the suspicions, with a report that tracked individual members of one Chinese hacker group for 6 years. This group, with aliases such as Ugly Gorilla and Superhard, was linked to a district in residential Shanghai that is home to Unit 61398 of the People's Liberation Army. The Chinese government condemned the Mandiant report. One change in recent years is that China's prime minister until 2013, Wen Jiabao, did not refer to China as one of the many countries involved in world trade, but often referred to China as a great power. The official line is no longer that China is a country that focuses primarily on internal development, and the country's international ambitions are more openly revealed. After the United States took a tremendous hit in the global financial crisis of September 2008, Mr. Wen announced that he was concerned about China's holding of U.S. Treasury bonds and other debt, and that China was watching economic developments in the United States closely. The message was sent as one equal country to another, a far cry from previous exchanges in which U.S. officials lectured Chinese officials about undervaluing Chinese currency. In the G20 summit meetings in Britain in April 2009, China took a central participating role and suggested that the economic crisis could be best addressed by a G2 meeting between the United States and China. International trade and business. Another integral part of the economic reform of the past quarter century has been the opening of the Chinese economy to international forces. 4 Special Economic Zones, SEZs, were established in 1979. In these regions, foreign investors were given preferential tax rates and other incentives. 5 years later, 14 more areas became SEZs, and today, foreign investments and free market mechanisms have spread to most of the rest of urban China. Since 1978, China's trade and industry have expanded widely. With its expansion has come rapidly growing GDP, entrepreneurship, and trade with many nations. A wealthy class of businessmen has emerged, and Chinese products have made their way around the world. China is now a member of the World Trade Organization, and it also has a most favored nation status for trading with the U.S. A monumental recognition of China's new economic power came in 1997, when the British officially gave the major trading city of Hong Kong back to Chinese control. Deng Xiaoping emphasized economic reform, but he continued to believe that the party should be firmly in command of the country. In general, he did not support political reforms that included democracy and/or more civil liberties for citizens. Freedoms and incentives were granted to entrepreneurs, but they have operated largely under the patron-client system, guanxi. Hong Kong. In 1997, the British ceded control of Hong Kong to mainland China under a One Country, Two Systems agreement signed by Britain and China in 1984. Under this policy, Hong Kong is subject to Chinese rule, but continues to enjoy a high degree of autonomy, meaning that it maintains its capitalist system, legal system, and ways of life. Since the handover, Beijing authorities have been less heavy-handed than feared, and Hong Kong today enjoys the same civil liberties as under British rule. Even though many Hong Kongers fear that the situation might change, their city is still one where people can openly talk politics, speak against the government, and choose a legislature in multi-party elections. In Hong Kong's case, the central Chinese government has devolved considerable powers to local officials. Despite these changes, pro-democracy groups in Hong Kong still push for more significant reforms. In September of 2014, a campaign known as the Umbrella Revolution began, with protesters demanding greater citizen input in elections than Beijing would allow. For weeks, protesters occupied important intersections of Hong Kong's roads, and the occupation lasted till December. Beijing responded with a plan for the election of the next chief executive in 2017 that permitted direct elections, but left nominations in the hands of a 1,200-member pro-establishment committee. Pro-democracy lawmakers defeated the election packet in June 2015, agreeing that it was meaningless. As a result, nothing changed, with the selection of Hong Kong's chief executive still under Beijing's control. Hong Kong's international trade was seriously impacted by the global economic crisis of late 2008, and its GDP shrank by 7.8% in the first quarter of 2009. To add to the city's economic woes in 2009, the Chinese government approved a plan to turn Shanghai into a global financial and shipping center by 2020, presenting competition to Hong Kong as the international star of the region. However, Hong Kong's elite remains staunchly pro-business, and the Chinese government has supported the city's economic development, and so far its future as a leading international trading center is most likely secure. Taiwan. The island of Taiwan was the destination of Chiang Kai-shek after being driven from the mainland China by Mao Zedong in 1949. Since post-World War II, Taiwan has claimed to be the Republic of China, separate from the People's Republic of China ruled by the Communist Party. Taiwan's autonomy was protected by the United States in a Cold War tactic against Communist China, and until the 1970s, Taiwan was recognized by Western nations as the sole legitimate representative of China. However, in 1971, Taiwan lost its membership in the United Nations and its seat on the Security Council to the People's Republic of China. And in 1979, the United States recognized mainland China diplomatically. Today, only a few countries recognize Taiwan's sovereignty. In recent years, the Chinese government has made its claim to Taiwan clear. Chinese leaders asserted the belief that Taiwan is historically and legitimately a part of China and should be returned to its control. The Taiwanese government does not agree, but political parties in Taiwan are split in their attitudes about how to respond to China's claims. One point of view is that Taiwan should stand up to or even defy China. But an opposite sentiment is that Taiwan should try to reconcile its differences with its giant neighbor. The fact that China is Taiwan's biggest trading partner has encouraged the Taiwanese leadership to explore the possibility of bringing the island closer to the mainland. Starting in 2008, negotiations began to restore the three links: transportation, commerce, and communications between the two sides, cut off since 1949. Party-to-party talks between the CPC and Taiwan's Kuomintang, KMT, have resumed, and semi-official negotiations through third-party organizations have taken place. An important change came when regular crossings across the Taiwan Strait began for aircraft and mail. Weekend charter flights began in July 2008, and weekday services were added by the end of the year. These changes now allowed for more regular communication between the island and the mainland, and almost certainly will ease trade and business exchanges as well. Still, relations are prickly, as evidenced by China's cutting off top-level military exchanges with America in 2010 in response to U.S. approval of $6.4 billion of arms sales to Taiwan. In 2013, China offered 31 new measures to better integrate Taiwan economically. Will China continue to expand its international contacts and its free market economy? If so, will tensions increase between economic and political sectors of the country? During the 20th century, many countries have struggled to define the relationship between free market economies and political leadership styles. Most obviously, the Soviet Union collapsed rather than reconcile market liberalization with centralized political power. Will the same thing happen to China, or will its policy of introducing market principles gradually work out in the end? This challenge and many more await answers from Xi Jinping and his leadership team.